We model ourselves like the Palestinians. We resist the same way they do. We've been occupied, suppressed, oppressed, tortured, and forcibly disappeared, torture centers on children as young as 5 years old. We have been a laboratory experiment. Are we not Muslim enough for you? We maintain our resistance, we maintained our Muslim identity, and we're proud of it. We have no problem in it.
It was the great Mughal Emperor Jahangir who said about Kashmir, Gar firdos rohi zameen ast, hamin asto hamin asto hamin ast. If there is a paradise on earth, it is here, it is here, it is here. For 76 years, this beautiful land and its wonderful people have been under Indian occupation. In 1947, upon partition, the original settlement between the principalities and the Indian government was to create an autonomous region where the vastly Muslim population would govern themselves under some notional Indian sovereignty. Over the successive decades and governments, this agreement has been eroded, and today Kashmir is one of the most heavily militarized places in the world. In 2019, the government of Narendra Modi annulled the provisions of the constitution that gave Kashmir this special status, the so-called Article 370, and began measures to integrate the territory into an Indian supremacist state. The revocation enabled Indians to purchase land in the valley and within time reset its Muslim majority demography. Indian occupation has been particularly brutal, and these past 6 years have seen horrendous rights abuses. Yet we do not talk enough about Kashmir and the plight of its Muslims. To set the record straight, I am honoured to have on the show Dr. Muzamil Thakur, who is the president of the World Kashmir Freedom Movement. Is Kashmir a forgotten conflict? Dr. Muzamil Ayub Thakur, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the Thinking Muslim.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
So Dr. Muzamil, let's start from the very, very basics, because I suspect there are lots of Muslims who just don't know enough about the Kashmir conflict, its origins, who's occupying, when did it begin, what's the nature of the occupation? Is it like the Uyghurs? Is it like Palestine? You know, there are, I suspect many, if not most Muslims who are watching this just don't understand the Kashmir conflict. So just take us through Kashmir 101, the very basics of this.
So like most conflicts or outstanding conflicts, it's a product of the British Raj. Kashmir has been occupied since 1947, but our liberation movement has started for a long time. We were sold by the British to the Sikh, to the Dogra Empire in 1846. So our history goes back. The same way that Palestinians have also, it's not, everything did not start on October the 7th, that everything didn't start in 1947 or 1948. But if we go based on modern history, post-partition, India and Pakistan were created. Muslim majority nations were supposed to go with Pakistan, Hindu majority nations with India. The problem with Kashmir was we had a Muslim majority with a Hindu ruler. The Hindu ruler, of course, wanted to accede with India, but because the population were Muslim, it was supposed to go with Pakistan. India said, no, 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 we have to accept what the ruler's decision is, and decided to impose their occupation. Whereas in other places like Hyderabad, it had a Muslim ruler, but Hindu subjects. And India said, no, 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 we have to listen to what the people want. So it was basically, you know, selective outrage and selective choices by the Indian government at the time. They decided to occupy Kashmir. The people of Kashmir did not want to be part of India. Well, whether they wanted to be part of Pakistan or independent is a completely different matter. They just didn't want to be a part of India. And people resisted. People fought. The entire state of Jammu and Kashmir decided to resist. October 27th, 1947, we recognize as a Black Day when the Indian forces landed in Kashmir and occupied the territory. And since then, the liberation movement has been ongoing. Now, now I can tell you about the atrocities since then, over 70 years, but I'll only tell you about what happened in November, where 250,000 Muslims were massacred in Jammu. And hundreds of thousands more had to flee and move to Pakistan or other areas because of the genocide that had happened. So genocide for the people of Kashmir has been going on for the last 76 years. And it wasn't incremental, it happened all of a sudden. And since then, we've been occupied, suppressed, oppressed, tortured, and forcibly disappeared. We've had pellets, bullets, the use of torture centers on children as young as 5 years old, the abduction of children, the abduction of men and women languishing in jails, political leaders like Masrat Alam, Asya Andrabi, Qasim Faktu. They murdered Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani and Ashraf Sahrai. Now, you may not know these names, but these names are as dear to us as they are, as certain names would be for the Palestinians or for the Iraqis or for the Afghans. These are big names for us. Responsible for the resistance, responsible for trying to preserve the Muslim identity. So India decided to occupy Kashmir because they wanted the land for themselves for a multitude of reasons. Some will say because of water resources. A lot of the water, hydroelectric power that can be generated and that is generated goes to India. It's a huge potential there. Also, it's a bone of contention between Pakistan and India. India don't want to lose face by giving up Kashmir to Pakistan. And at the same time, you also have to remember there are separatist movements happening inside India. The Sikhs, they want their Khalistan to be recognized. The people in Assam are also being subjected to some of the worst forms of violence. People of Manipur, Nagaland, the Naxals, South Indians, even the people of Maharashtra that are considered to be pure Indians, even they don't like the rest of India. So, I mean, that's a subject for a different day, but the reason for the occupation is simply because India didn't want to give or concede Kashmir to Pakistan. They didn't want for Pakistan to create a larger Muslim belt in the region and cover the India's northern territory. Again, probably better to ask India why it was so important to them, but from the perspective of a Kashmiri, a lot of it is ego. A lot of it is geostrategic political reasons. You also have to remember at the time, the Russians also wanted a presence in the subcontinent after the Cold War. So much going on at that time. But the most important fact to understand is that the Muslims were not supposed to be assimilated with the rest of India. You had a choice. The same way that the rest of the Muslims inside India, if they wanted to leave, they left and they went to Pakistan. And those that remained, we know what the condition of the Muslims in India are today. And the people of Kashmir knew what the conditions were going to be. We warned, in fact, the Muslims of India that this is going to happen. Whatever is happening to us will happen to you. We have been a laboratory experiment happening for the last 7 decades. And every time we would warn the Muslims in India that this is eventually going to happen to you. And it happened to them. It happened to them on a scale that even they couldn't understand. We maintain our resistance. We maintained our Muslim identity. We didn't allow it to be diluted. So anybody that said to us or asked us or expected from us to take it lying down the same way that other Muslims may have, we model ourselves like the Palestinians. We resist the same way they do.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. One of the things that we should try to inculcate in our life is a reciprocation of Allah's blessings, recognizing the sunan of Allah. And one of the great sunans of Allah, the patterns of Allah in creation that we see in the Quran and through Hadith, is for us to care for orphans. So just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took care of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we should then extend that care to the orphans in the world today. And Baytul Mal is at the forefront of doing this. $64 a month, $768 a year, you can take care of an orphan in the Muslim world. Imagine how powerful that is. That orphan will come and bear witness for you in the hereafter that you provided food, shelter, water, care, and value in meaning in a world that has lost its meaning. I want to encourage you to support the work of Baytul Mal through this orphan sponsorship. $64 a month, $768 a year can really impact and change the world.
Is Kashmir a forgotten conflict? I mean, we talk about Palestine, we talk about Gaza, we talk about other places, but for some reason we don't talk enough about Kashmir. Is it forgotten?
You say that the similarities between Kashmir and Palestine. There are also similarities between the oppressor, India, and the Zionists. Their ideology, their philosophy, the way they want to implement their pan-nation, the theory of their Aryan race nation theory. But at the same time, you're right. I believe that we are the forgotten nation. I think we are a forgotten conflict. If I go far back in history enough, I can give you moments where we had our own Arab Springs multiple times and nobody noticed. You mentioned 2019. It was a pivotal moment for us. Article 370, which was a provision that and 35A, it was a provision that allowed Kashmiris to own their own land, so no foreigner could buy up land in Kashmir. That prevented settler colonization and demographic change. That's now eliminated. That is a major thing. It's a major thing for the Uyghurs, for the Rohingya, for the Palestinians, as we've seen people have gotten agitated about it, but not for the people of Kashmir. So it's beyond not just about the memories of are Kashmiris forgotten or not. It's, does anybody actually care about the Muslims of Kashmir? Are we not Muslim enough for you? Is my beard not long enough for you? Is my aqeedah not correct enough for you? What is the problem? So as being here on Thinking Muslim podcast and reaching out to a plethora of different type of Muslims around the world, answer me this. What is it about the Kashmiris that you cannot get behind? Not just as Muhammad Jalal, and I will ask you this personally as well, and I ask everybody else as well. What is it about Kashmir that you cannot get behind the same way that you can get behind any other Muslim conflict around the world?
But it is quite odd, isn't it? In Britain, for example, we've got a largely Pakistani community, and probably the great chunk of those Pakistanis are from Kashmir, from Azad Kashmir. We'll talk about the distinction in a second, but yet they're Kashmiris. But on university campuses, young Kashmiris, young Pakistanis, young Muslims tend to do more activism, say, for Palestine than they do for Kashmir. I mean, how do you explain that disconnect?
See, I find you very offensive. I find that a very offensive question.
Go on.
And I'll tell you why.
Yes.
This is a question that has to be asked about the student communities, student-led organizations, the Muslim organizations that exist in the United Kingdom. I'm not going to name drop them to shame them all, but we all know who they are.
Yeah.
That it takes a genocide for people to get together for certain causes. More recently, for what happened in Palestine, especially in Gaza, it took that for people to get agitated and to get organized and to try and alleviate the suffering of the people of Palestine. When you ask me that why can't people get behind that for Kashmir, I find it offensive, not because you're asking the question, I find it offensive that other people have not realized that what are they not doing? Or rather, how are they misrepresenting Islam and their identity as Muslims? We spoke earlier, and we were in the same protests and same vigils and same, anything that had to do with post 9/11, be it Afghanistan, be it Libya, be it Iraq, and be it Palestine, more recently with Yemen and other. We've always been there, organizing, protesting, being in the back, being in the front, whatever it may be. Can you remember a time that you, as Muhammad Jalal, or your peers, or anybody else that you know, did the same thing for the people of Kashmir? So when you ask me why it isn't there, I asked you, why weren't you there? Why didn't you do it? Why didn't my friends do it? My colleagues do it? Why is it only the Kashmiris that have to talk about their own selves? I ask you another question. How many Palestinians do you see on the front lines talking about Palestine? They have their people. Yes. The Palestinians don't need to speak for themselves because we are all ready to give whatever it needs for their cause.
Yeah.
Who's there to speak for the Kashmiris? It's not, and I hate to use the term and I hate to compare, and I don't want to compare because the Palestinian cause is a sacred cause. In fact, it is so sacred to the people of Kashmir.
Yeah.
And to me personally, that in fact, the first protests that I ever remember going into were Palestinian protests. I don't remember going to the Kashmiri protests until I was much, much older. But for the people of Kashmir, the Palestinian cause is so sacred that any time something happens in Palestine, a few years ago, in fact, there was an air raid. Jet fighters had shot their machine guns in Palestine, and of course, the world community were in arms, and the Muslim community came out to the streets. During that time, only one person anywhere in the world was killed protesting for Palestine. It was a Kashmiri living in Kashmir from an occupied territory.
Wow.
During this recent spate of violence by the Zionists on the Palestinians, we have Kashmiris in Kashmir creating graffiti art in support of Palestine, charged under the Terrorism Act. And we're proud of it. We have no problem in it. We're not asking the Muslims to be charged under terrorism acts for the people of Kashmir. We're asking that at least you make the dua. At least in the khutbah, or in Jummah, that you make the dua for Kashmir the same way that you do it for everybody else. Are we not part of that ummah? Do we not bleed? To paraphrase Shakespeare, do we not have 2 eyes, 2 ears, a mouth and a nose as you do? Are we not part of that ummah?
So explain the layout of Kashmir. So we have around a third of the country, if I'm not mistaken, that we would define as Azad Kashmir. So this is Kashmir, which is attached to Pakistan. And then 2/3 of Kashmir is under Indian occupation. Just set out the geography for me, please.
It's important to remember that the Azad Kashmir, the liberated part of Kashmir, which is called Azad Kashmir, was liberated by its own people.
Yeah.
They fought the Indian Dogra, they fought the Indian army, and they managed to liberate themselves. They wanted to liberate the entire of Kashmir.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Indian army prevented that. That area of Azad Kashmir has an autonomy within Pakistan. The Pakistani constitution has said that the will of the people of Kashmir, once the plebiscite has happened, the referendum has happened, they will be the decision makers of how the relationship between Kashmir and Pakistan will be. If they want to have an autonomy, they want to be merged with Pakistan, whatever the relationship Kashmir wants. Whereas India say that Kashmir is an integral part of India, both parts of Kashmir, to the extent that they even want to go to war with Pakistan for the so-called recapture of the liberated part of Kashmir. Now, India will use the argument that Pakistani tribal forces and army, but you can't. Let's leave the Muslim part of this aside. Let's talk about history. Historically, there are plenty of documented evidences to provide evidence that the people after the World War, they came back. They were veterans. They were armed. They were itching to go. And when they heard the Muslims inside the Kashmir Valley were being massacred by the Dogra ruler, they wanted to liberate their fellow Muslims. So those are the people that came in an attempt to liberate the whole Kashmir land. Obviously, one part was liberated, the other part unfortunately fell to the Indian occupation, which continues today.
And when we think about the demography of Kashmir in particular, the overwhelming majority are Muslims.
Overwhelming. Right? Always has been.
Yeah. So let's talk about Article 370, because in 2019, the Modi government and Amit Shah, the Home Minister, they issued this statement that they would revoke this really important bit of the constitution, which gave this autonomy to Kashmiris and prevented the purchasing of homes and land by non-Kashmiris. That's now been reversed. And since then, Kashmir has been, previous to that, I think it's fair to say that it was a heavily militarized zone, but it's now become even more militarized. So just take me through the implications of that Article 370 on Kashmiri people, please.
I can summarize 370-35A very shortly. It is legalized settler colonization and demographic change. Legalized, constitutionally. India had to amend that. Not only did they have to illegally revoke the articles that existed for Kashmir, which was supposed to be temporary pending a referendum. It is a conflict zone. It is a disputed territory according to the United Nations. So whatever India did was illegal, to the extent they had to amend their own constitution first before they could fiddle around with Kashmir.
Yeah.
That constitutional amendment essentially means that non-Muslims can come into Kashmir, buy up our land at whatever rate they decide, and kick us out. When infrastructure is being developed, it's not being developed for us. When roads have been developed inside Kashmir, it's been most of the time it's been for the military personnel to be able to move from one barrack to another, one territory to another.
Yeah.
Our traditional apple orchards and saffron fields have been converted into shopping malls and whatnot. That's not our history. That's not our culture. It never has been. The rice fields, the schools and hospitals that have been taken over and turned into bunkers and military barracks for the army. So this is basically legalized settler colonization and demographic change that has never been seen before. Yes, we've seen it the way that the Israelis have done it, but where do you think the Indians have learnt it from? The Zionists.
Yeah.
They are hand in hand. They always have been. So far back in history, from the times of the 1920s, they've had a relationship.
Yeah.
When the RSS were formed, it was envisioned, maybe not directly with the Zionists at the time, but more in line with the Nazis. If you look at the uniform of the RSS, the parent organization of the BJP, which is run by Modi. The uniform, same as the Nazis. The salute, same as the Nazis. The vision, the same as the Nazis. Do you remember what the Nazis' philosophy was? One party, one ruler, one nation. That's exactly the philosophy that has been translated by the RSS for India. That's more than 100 years ago. The difference is they had patience. They waited patiently. Until the 1990s, they only had 1 or 2 members of parliament. Today, they rule the country. 3 terms Modi has won. Landslide victories. And if he doesn't win the next one, we know that they're going to have somebody else. He may not individually win, but somebody else will. And what is their agenda? To continue that annihilation of the Muslim identity, not just in Kashmir, not just in the rest of India. If people know, then they know what the Muslims are facing inside India. But the vision that they have of one party, one nation, one ruler expands beyond the sovereign borders of India, expands beyond Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, even beyond Pakistan, all the way to Saudi Arabia.
Now, in my introduction, I said that it's one of the most militarized places in the world. I think there's one, for every 1 citizen, there are 10, for every 10 citizens is 1 soldier. What you've described there is a cultural demographic change. But of course, it seems to me that Indian occupation is far more than that. It's far more violent than that. Just set out the sort of the daily life of a Kashmiri for us, please.
People have become so desensitized to violence. Right? We see it regularly, not just in our neighborhoods, not just on the TV, not just in Palestine and the Rohingya and Yemen and Syria. We just see it so regularly that it just doesn't register with us anymore. But for someone like me that's witnessed it firsthand, my wife tells me I still have night terrors. I mean, I didn't know, but apparently I have PTSD. I've seen, and I've had to bury more friends and family with dismembered limbs and their internal organs on the roadside, and having to pick them up and take them to the burial. I've done that more times than I care to remember. And this is not history. I'm not talking about what happened in 1947 or 1836. I'm talking about what's happened in my lifetime, what I've seen with my own eyes. Seeing mothers, a particular mother that had been going from home to school every single day, but she'd always come back home empty-handed. And I asked one of my friends after a long time of seeing this regularly, I said, well, why does she keep doing this? And he said that her son had gone missing one day. He had gone to school and he never came home. And for the last 12 years, she goes to school every single day, hoping that one day she might see her son and bring him home again. That's the reality of Kashmir. In 2019, when Article 370-35A were revoked, there was a complete shutdown in Kashmir. No media, no internet, no journalism, no communication, nothing. To the extent that it was such a strict curfew that a woman that had tried to go to the hospital by foot, that was about to give birth, was prevented, and she had to give birth. She had to give birth on the side of the road, a stillbirth, because there was no medical aid. People that had died in their homes or on the streets were prevented from being buried in the graveyard. They were buried in their back gardens. I'm only telling you what's happened in the last 5 or 6 years. I could tell you from 1947 how in a matter of days, 250,000 people were massacred. 250,000 people in a matter of days. A genocide and ethnic cleansing in itself. And that's been happening ever since. I can tell you about the hundreds of thousands of orphans, the widows, the half-widows. Do you know what a half-widow is? A half-widow is a woman whose husband has been enforcibly disappeared and she doesn't know where he is. Now tell me, as a Muslim, can somebody give that woman a fatwa and say to her, can she get remarried or not? Is she still married or not? She's a half-widow. And then you have the orphans, the hundreds of thousands of orphans. You have the torture centers, where people have had nails pulled out from their fingers. People swear, living in the localities, they swear that they can still hear the screams, even though that torture center has been closed down many, many years ago. The level of PTSD that people have inside Kashmir, probably 1 in 2 people, I think the MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, they said that 1 in 2 people have PTSD. Where do I start? Can I tell you about the pellets? Pellets are illegal to be used on human beings. And that is the first use on people. Children as young as 18-month-old Hibba, blinded in her eye while she was sitting in her mother's lap inside her home. What was her fault? Insha Malik, blinded in both eyes, permanently, wanted to be a doctor. Now she needs doctors. Children as young as 5 years old that were taken from their mother's lap in the middle of the night and arrested because they might be a threat to the Indian state. Political leaders, nearly every single legitimate political leader inside Kashmir is in jail or has been assassinated. Jalil Andrabi was picked up from his home, his body dismembered because he was going to testify in front of the United Nations. So, I mean, I remember case studies. I can tell you the case studies from the Palestinians, from the Uyghurs, from the Rohingya, from the Iraqis, from Afghanistan for over the last 20 years. Can you tell me about case studies in Kashmir? As Muhammad Jalal. And that's the problem. It's not just about what the situation in Kashmir is that why is our voice not reaching you? It's not that we're not being heard. Our voices are there. I'm here. Other people are here. We speak. We do. We're active. Where is the empathy and the sympathy or the activism for the people of Kashmir? The stories that come out from Kashmir. How many do you want? I have Khurram Parvez is part of the Jammu Kashmir Coalition of Civil Society. He published many reports, but one of his most famous reports was cited, quoted by the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner. Khurram Parvez is now in jail since the last 5 years. That report is so important, but how many people have read it? It is documented evidence of all the war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, genocide that has been committed inside Indian occupied Kashmir. How many members of parliamentarians know about this? Let's leave them members of parliament. What do we expect from elected officials? How many of our masjids know about this? How many of our organizations that claim to represent the Muslim community in the United Kingdom have talked about this? How many have disseminated the information freely? That's where we stand right now.
Muzammil, tell me about your uncle who passed away.
My uncle was assassinated after I made a statement in the United Nations regarding the arrest of war criminals like Narendra Modi, Amit Shah, Ajit Doval, and many other people in the BJP. Very shortly after that, my uncle was found dead in a very shallow river, and it was claimed that he had drowned. I mean, the river was about that deep. I've been there, I've lived there, I know that river, and for a person that's lived there his whole life, my uncle, it just wasn't possible that he could have drowned, and the marks on his body did not indicate it was just a drowning. The gentleman had been assassinated. My cousins languish in jail because of the work that I do. It's not just my cousins, everybody. I mean, anybody that talks about Kashmir suffers. One of them still is in jail and tortured regularly and asked about my activities. My other family members, either in jail or tortured under loudspeakers. In 2019, the New York Times had published an article talking about how children as young as 5 years old were taken to the local masjid and tortured on a loudspeaker to instill fear and terror among the population. Happened to my cousin, and it's still happening to him. So these are the realities. When we talk about the similarities between Kashmir and Palestine, yes, our sufferings are very similar, sometimes shockingly the same, but all perpetrated by our oppressor who are also shockingly the same. The same philosophy, the same ideology, the same tactics. Bear in mind that India have been the largest importer of Israeli weapons in the world for the longest time. They share intelligence, they share technology, they share tactics. I think once a year or twice a year, their military personnel visit each other to train each other in new forms of combat and occupation.
When the genocide in Gaza began, I vowed we would never let those responsible get away with this. Silence was complicity in a world that wants us to remain placid, a world that wants us to be concerned more about our immediate lives and interests. The system buys our souls in return for acquiescence with their empire-building project. We at the Thinking Muslim set about changing the narrative, and in the process, with Allah's barakah, we galvanize our communities to confront these political elites and send them a clear message. In elections on both sides of the Atlantic, we brought communities together and led the way in countering their pernicious agenda. Such is the power of this new media. Our mission is simple. We want to build an alternative Muslim media one that is rooted in faith, thinking, and enlightened activism. And we need your help to expand this sacred undertaking. Our plan is to turn the Thinking Muslim into a multi-show, multi-country media project. Please help us by becoming a member. For as little as £10 a month, you will have access to bonus shows, behind-the-scenes content, and Q&A with me and my guests. But most importantly, your contributions will make this voluntary project go to the next level and give you a share, inshallah ta'ala, in this reward. Now, I know the demands on our sadaqah are great. Please do consider becoming a member of the Thinking Muslim, or send us your one-off donations by going to thinkingmuslim.com/membership. Jazakallah khair, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of us. Muzammil, your father, I believe, it was the only person in modern Indian history to be prosecuted for treason. He was part of a resistance movement, of an insurgency. Can you talk to me about your father and the resistance in Kashmir?
The resistance comes in many forms, as we all know. Comes in armed, political, diplomatic, economic. My father was exiled from Kashmir in the late 70s. So I was born in Saudi Arabia, in exile. My father's activities leading up to that point involved being part of the Islami Jamiat Talibah, an offshoot of the Jamaat-e-Islami. He founded the youth wing. So even at that time, they understood that the war that's happening inside Kashmir was against Islam and the Muslim identity. By profession, he was a nuclear physicist. He had a PhD in nuclear physics. I think he was the first nuclear physicist from north of India, let alone from Kashmir. But he organized, along with other people, they organized conferences in Kashmir where the Imam of Mecca had come to visit. So they were doing a lot of activities. But once we moved to the UK, he continued the diplomatic and political efforts, and of course, representing the armed resistance to the best of his abilities. And the reason for that is because armed resistance is a negotiating tool. It may not be the means to the end, but it is a negotiating tool, as we've seen in modern history and in past history, that everybody believes that solutions must be made at the table, negotiating, diplomatically and politically. But when the oppressor and your enemy refuses to come to the table and says there is no issue, let alone the table, there is no table, what do? So my father was involved in all aspects of the liberation movement and exiled, never to return home. So he never saw the marriages of his brothers and sisters, could never visit his parents, even after they died, to the extent that once my father passed away in 2004, we appealed that he be buried in his ancestral home, in his ancestral land. They denied it, saying that he was an enemy of the state and a traitor. So I wear that badge with pride, that he was an enemy of India, an enemy of the oppressor. It's a certificate in itself.
I mean, the Indian government would argue that the resistance in Kashmir is very much a proxy for the Pakistani government and the Pakistani military in particular. I mean, are there any grounds to that claim?
Well, the indigenous organizations inside Kashmir are the TRF, the PAFF, Hizbul Mujahideen, all run by indigenous Kashmiris. Yeah, some of them may be based in Pakistan, some of them are still based in India, some of them are in Kashmir. Those that are living in India, does that mean that Hizbul Mujahideen or any of the organizations are proxies of the Indian government? The location of these organizations does not matter. What matters is that what is the role of Pakistan? The role of Pakistan has always been to lend political, diplomatic, and any form of support to the people of Kashmir in any shape or form. If they provide it politically, which they do, and diplomatically, which they do, then we appreciate it. If they facilitate armed resistance and any other thing as well, then I'm sure the people of Kashmir will welcome that as well. Because again, it is the only negotiating tool that exists. So being proxies of Pakistan makes no sense. It's the people of Kashmir that are resisting India, not the people of Pakistan, not the government of Pakistan. As long as the people of Kashmir resists their oppressor, we will have friends anywhere across the world, the same way that the Palestinians. As long as the Palestinians says that we resist the Zionists, we will stand here, we will stand and sit and do whatever needs to be done to liberate the people of Palestine.
I mean, how serious do you think Pakistan is and the Pakistan military are when it comes to the liberation of Kashmir? I mean, is there a seriousness behind their support, or do they just use it as one part of leverage, against their neighbor?
I can't speak on behalf of the Pakistan military or the Pakistan government. What I can do is refer you to the recent statements of the Chief of Army Staff of Pakistan, who said we've fought 3 wars against India for Kashmir, we can fight another 10 wars.
Right.
Recently, on the 5th of February, if people, I hope people know this, and I know they don't, so I pray that they remember this. The 5th of February is considered to be Kashmir Solidarity Day. On that day, in Azad Kashmir, the liberated part of Kashmir, the Kashmiri Mujahideen, annually, they use the 5th of February as a day to gather the people together to remind them that the Kashmir movement is still ongoing. The Kashmiri Mujahideen had been seen on the stage with Hamas in the liberated portion of Kashmir.
Right.
So when we talk about what Pakistan's role is or what do they want to do, I think what we've seen over the last 6 months is pretty evident that Pakistan fully supports all forms of resistance against Indian occupation and tyranny, most importantly, against the annihilation of the Muslim identity.
I mean, the line of control between Pakistan and India seems to be pretty static now. And both sides, they, maybe for domestic purposes, they talk about, as you said, Asim Munir, he says, he can fight 10 more wars, and Bajwa used to say that, and Musharraf used to talk about that. And of course, Modi does that for his audience, and the Congress party used to say that as well. But in reality, nothing has really shifted and changed for a very long time. Is that an indication that a lot of this is hot air for public consumption? But in reality, there isn't really going to be a military solution to this conflict, because neither side would entertain going to war over Kashmir.
You would think that, especially when both countries are nuclear powers, and then you have China, which is right there, that also has nuclear weapons. And on the other side, you have Iran, allegedly, that has nuclear weapons. I use allegedly because nobody actually knows.
Yeah.
You would think they wouldn't go to war. But I remind you that the Indian Air Force had sent their pilot, Abhinandan, to attack Pakistan.
Yes.
And Pakistan returned him with some fantastic tea, as he said.
Not Kashmiri pink tea.
No, unfortunately, no. I don't think he would have been able to tolerate that tea.
Yes.
But he returned with tea. Now, that was a test. That was an experiment.
Yeah.
You have to realize that India is no different to the Zionists. They are cut from the same cloth. They have the same playbook. They do the same things to the same people. They believe in a pan-nation.
Yeah.
They believe that Pakistan was a mistake. They believe it must be absorbed back into India. They believe that Bangladesh needs to be absorbed. You know, when Sheikh Hasina was ousted from Bangladesh, you know that the only country that had the biggest problem was India.
Yes.
It should make no difference to them. What difference does it make that Sheikh Hasina was ousted and somebody else came in?
Yeah.
But they had a problem. The interference that India had when Afghanistan was still under occupation, what was the role that India had in Afghanistan? Why did they have a base set up in Afghanistan? Why did they continue to have something in Tajikistan? Why are they trying to create something against the CPEC, the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor, this Chabahar port? Why do they want to counteract the CPEC with that? Well, why is there so much influence in Nepal and Burma and Sri Lanka by the Indians?
Yeah.
They have an agenda the same way that the Zionists have. And if we pull up a map, I can show it to you. The way that the Greater Israel map, everybody has seen the Greater Israel map. I tell you, go have a look at the Hindutva map. They claim the holy Kaaba in Mecca, our holy Kaaba, as the Makeshwar Mahadev temple. Now, Muhammad Jalal may laugh at this,
Yes.
but the Hindus inside India are staunch believers in this.
Really.
Now, we may have our own Iman, and we say, nothing can happen to the Muslims, we are strong in this and that. But we've seen what the Muslims have done with the Palestinians, the Muslim nations. Now, if we have something called Iman and Tawakkul, do you think that the Hindus don't? They also have a belief. They also want to get stuff done.
Yeah.
They want to create their pan-Hindu nation because they believe they are the superior race, the selected race, the Aryan race. They have an agreement with Israel. You look at the map again, that the Zionists will take up to North Saudi Arabia and India will take the rest. They want to create that entire belt because they believe that the entire world comes from India. whatever their belief system is and however much we ridicule it, they still believe it. Now, post 9/11, the West outsourced the war of so-called terror, which was actually the war on Islam, to India. And India happily accepted. And that franchise that India now has become so powerful that they're able to tell the Minister of External Affairs, Jaishankar, his name is Jaishankar, who was recently in Chatham House. He's able to go to Washington, D.C., and when asked about why India is not putting sanctions on Russian crude oil, he said, go do what you need to do. That's not our business. That's your European problem. He dismissed them like this. Americans used to do that. And India used to be the yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir. And now they're the ones dictating terms because they took that franchise on the war against Islam and they've been very successful in it. So successful, in fact, that I would argue that they have been more successful than the Zionists in Palestine. Because you hear about what the Palestinians are going through, but you don't hear what the people of Kashmir are going through, or for that matter, what the Muslims in India are going through. So when you ask, no real war is going to happen between India and Pakistan, they're both nuclear powers. But more importantly, what is the war about? Is it just about land? Is it about geopolitical strategy? Or is it about eliminating the Muslim identity for a greater vision and a greater agenda?
So you've talked now about Hindutva and Modi and the RSS. And of course, there is a Nazification of the, let's say, the Indian identity. Just talk us through that. What is it about Modi and his ideology that's particularly problematic for Kashmiris?
Not just for Kashmiris, but for every Muslim, and not just limited to the subcontinent. I will go so far as to say even all the way up to Saudi Arabia. I mean, regardless of what we think of Saudi Arabia, but the Muslims there should also be concerned. The problem is that, again, I'm going to challenge you on this and say, if you understand Zionism, you should understand Hindutva. That's the end of this. I mean, the question is over. That's my answer. I shouldn't need to explain it more than that, because honestly, as much as I have studied, read, researched on Hindutva, there is very, very, very little to make it different to Israeli Zionism. They believe in the same thing. Their relationship is phenomenal. I mean, there was a time where India were supporters of the Palestinian statehood and condemned Israel, yet behind closed doors were taking support from Israel against their war, for their war against China. That relationship has always been there. So overtly, it's been very different, but covertly, it's always been the same. Their agenda is to eliminate the Muslims. Their agenda is to create a one party, one nation, one ruler system, because they believe they are the chosen race. I mean, why are the Zionists doing what they do? And what is their agenda? How far will they, what are they willing to sacrifice for it? What are the influences that the Zionists have? No different to the Indians. But again, where Israel have failed, India have succeeded. Now, you may say that Israel have not failed. I tell you they failed because everybody knows what they're doing. I tell you they failed because they've been exposed at every corner. At every step, they've been exposed. The speed at which that they were pushing their propaganda, twice as fast it was being countered. Not by states, but by you, by me, by everybody, by the Joe public. So that's where India are successful and will continue to be successful. So the threat that people need to understand is that it is against Islam. They've declared it openly. It isn't a secret. It never was a secret. They're proud enough to, I mean, they're so, with such great pride, with their chests out, they say, this is what our agenda is. Create concentration camps against the Muslims and minorities. Eliminate the Dalits and the Christians. On Christmas Day, what they did to the Christians, fine, we're Muslims and we weep for ourselves. But my God, if anybody Christian that's watching this, look at what is happening to your own brethren inside India. But again, it may be a race problem because, they're brown, so therefore they don't really matter. There are so many complexities to the subcontinent, especially when it comes to the RSS agenda, the Hindutva agenda, the Zionist agenda. And we should be comfortable enough to say the Hindutva Zionist agenda to make sure people understand it is one and the same thing. Colors may be different, but the people are the same. The world must be prepared for fascism 2.0. We thought that we got rid of Hitler. It was only reborn in the RSS. And they've been biding their time. They've been biding their time for 100 years, and they've started to implement all of those policies today. The CAA, the NRC bills, Citizens Amendmentship Act, and the National Register of Citizens. The way that they've created, particularly Muslims and other minorities, as second-class citizens, to the extent that they created concentration camps in Assam.
Yeah.
So, what are we waiting for? Why doesn't anybody know about this? I mean, are we literally waiting for another Holocaust? Because it's already happened in Kashmir.
Yeah.
It's happened in many, many places inside India. Thus, the Muslims around the world seem to be indifferent to us. Why is that?
What are the tentacles of the reach of this Hindutva ideology? I note that here in the West, there seems to be a very cozy relationship between the Modi government and Trump, and Modi government and the British government here and across Western nations. There isn't this alarm at this rise of fascism in India. In fact, the news very rarely carries stories of the lynchings and the militarization of Kashmir and the rapes and the other horrible crimes that take place there. So what is that relationship between Western capitals and Modi?
Post 9/11, it comes. I keep re-emphasizing this because I think it was a pivotal time. It's when India were able to present itself as a proxy for the West in the subcontinent, because the West wanted somebody against China. It wasn't going to be Pakistan, because Pakistan and China have a phenomenal relationship. But you also have to remember the rise of imperialism in this day and age again. The American imperialism has always been there. It's never really died down. The Russians want the old USSR back. We can see what they're doing in the Ukraine.
Yeah.
The Chinese and their obsession with Taiwan. The British and their meddling everywhere across the world. Of course, India wants a piece of that pie. They've positioned themselves very well and very successfully as authorities in the subcontinent to no longer be proxies, but be the main players. So when we think about Modi and the relationship that he has with the West, he's continued that relationship where he's no longer just a proxy for the West, but he's now telling them that we can offer support to you for your things, for what you need to do. Be it economic. Look, India is one of the largest
Markets,
in the world, and also the labor class in the world. After the war that the West had against China, and the Chinese losing a lot of their manufacturing plants, where did all that manufacturing go to? It went to India. It happened by design. The Indians are very clever. They play the long game. I think it was maybe Churchill or it was Lord Mountbatten that said that you can say what you want about the Indians. They have a lot of flaws, but one thing they're very good at is they're very good at being sycophants. And the Indian government have been sycophants for so long that they've managed to kind of turn the tables. Look at it this way. Can you imagine somebody calling the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland as their son-in-law? I mean, culturally, that's putting somebody underneath your shoe as being submissive. Yeah. When Narendra Modi calls Rishi Sunak his son-in-law, and Rishi Sunak says, "Yes, sir," I mean, really, the tables have turned. That's the situation that we're in. When Indian spies have been caught in Qatar and then returned safely, when Indian spies in Germany have been caught and not been charged, when the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada and no consequence of that.
It was a Sikh separatist leader.
Sikh separatist, exactly.
Yeah.
And then again, the attempt in New York, in London, in other places, in Pakistan, more than 20 Kashmiri leaders were assassinated. There has been no response. I mean, when the Zionists did it, do you remember I think it was Dubai, where they assassinated somebody?
Yes.
There was a big hoo-ha. And that was one or two, I think, in terms of assassination of Palestinians on that kind of level, in that style, it's only been a few times. The Indians have been doing it regularly.
Yeah.
Not only have we not heard about it, but when governments have been approached and it's been submitted that, this is a case, this is a transnational repression case, not only do they not take it up, if they take it up, it's being dumped the next day because of the power of India. So going back to the point, India are in a very strong position where they can, I don't want to use the term dictating position, but they are in a better negotiating position. I mean, like I said, they were able to tell the West, leave us alone. We don't need to put sanctions on Russia on crude oil. What are you going to do about it? And then literally nobody does anything about it.
So they're acting with impunity.
Literal impunity.
Do you fear for yourself? I mean, you're outspoken. You live here in Britain and you travel to the United Nations and you speak for the Kashmiri people. Do you fear that you can be targeted, or have you been targeted by the Indian government?
People are targeted in different ways. Sometimes it's physical. A few months ago, there was an attempt to attack me. I suffered a broken rib. Alhamdulillah, I was able to return the favor by, I don't want to say what I did just in case I implicate myself in a court case. But the answer was justifiably so. There are other ways that we suffer. Our families no longer communicate with us because they are arrested or assassinated for being in communication with us. Friends no longer are friends. I can no longer travel back. I'm on a hit list. I'm on a blacklist. I've heard there has been an attempt to extradite me. So there are things that happen. Am I afraid? A Muslim is only afraid of his akhirah. So the only thing that I'm genuinely afraid of is, will I be able to face my Lord and say to him that I did everything that I could in my power to liberate Muslims, not just in Kashmir, but around the world. I gave my time to the Palestinians, I gave my time to the Rohingya, I gave my time to the Syrians, I gave my time to the Kashmiris, but was I able to do them justice, give them justice and do justice for myself? That is what I'm afraid of. Very few things that I'm afraid of in this life. People talk about spiders and snakes. I'm terrified of dying. Not because it's the end of me, but because I don't know, I have no guarantee that I will smell even the gates of Jannah. That's what I'm afraid of. Have I done enough to attain that?
I understand that the Indian government, they prohibit your social media posts in India and in Kashmir, and your voice is banned. Is that right?
I'm the new Jerry Adams.
Really?
Yeah. So my voice, they detect my voice, they detect my face, and they detect certain, I don't know how they're doing this.
AI.
Yeah. So anybody, and it's not just if I share it, if anybody else shares it, the Indian government sends them a message through the social media platform and says that this is a criminal offense. So yeah, this is the new reality. This is what we're facing now.
Yeah. Now, throughout today's interview, Muzammil, I think it's fair to say you've been quite angry with the response from the Muslim communities around the world.
Is it not justified?
I think it is very much justified.
Alhamdulillah. At least you agree with me.
I certainly do agree with you. It certainly is justified. And, one needs to question, oneself about how much we raise Kashmir. I mean, we had a few shows on it in the past, but how much we've made it a regular theme. And inshallah, going forward, we want to do that.
Inshallah.
But how do we remedy this? Like, in your mind, how do we make sure that within the Muslim communities, especially here in the West, where we do have a voice, that we consistently raise the issue of Kashmir on our agenda?
We start with you. We start with the Thinking Muslim podcast. We start by giving platform to the indigenous folk of Kashmir. It doesn't have to be the indigenous, but at least you talk about those issues. You talk about not just about the violence being perpetuated on the Muslims, but also talk about what the oppressor is. Sometimes I think to myself, and maybe we can have a discussion about this at some point, that as Muslims, are we more concerned about the suffering of Muslims, or are we more concerned about having a hate figure to hate against, to fight against? It's a very strange question, but sometimes I think that there may be a distinction. That sometimes people need an authority to fight against, and other people need to feel solidarity with an oppressed.
Yeah.
And once we figure that out, I think we need to talk to other people, other organizations, particularly those organizations in the United Kingdom that claim to represent Muslim communities, without having to necessarily name them. But they've been around long enough. They haven't done their they haven't done ample work for Kashmir. They've done it for everybody else, but not for us. And before we ask them, I think, as angry and as bitter as many Kashmiris are, and I won't speak on behalf of them, I'll speak about myself. As angry and as bitter I may be, I still have hope. Because I saw how the Muslim community came together for all the other Muslim conflicts around the world. And it's not even just the Muslim conflicts. Even in the United Kingdom, how much Muslims give to, for example, the food banks, how much they helped during the times of COVID. We aren't just the Muslims for Muslims, we are Muslims for everybody. So if we are for everybody, Kashmiris are also Muslims. Our heart bleeds the same way. It bleeds for you as well, the same way it bleeds for the Palestinians. All we ask is that even if you don't bleed for us, at least keep us in your prayers. You know, there's a hadith, I think, don't quote me on this, correct me if I'm wrong, that when you have knowledge, when you have ilm, and you don't act upon it, what is the name of that person? I know what the English word is, it's called a hypocrite, but in the Arabic term, it is so much more stronger that even I hesitate to use the term, because it is so heavy. And I don't want Muslims to fall into that category. I don't want the mothers on in the day of Akhirah to say that you were all hypocrites. That when I cried out to the Muslim world, you did nothing. When Muzammil came here and spoke to Muhammad Jalal and talked to the audience and told them about Kashmir, that you still did nothing. You're not answerable to me. You're going to be answerable to that mother that's still looking for her son after 30 years. Parveen Ahangar, for example. You're still going to be answerable to Tufail Matu, who was killed with a tear gas shot to the head. And his parents don't know what to do with themselves. He was the only son in the family. Or the young girl that I met many, many years ago that was a mute because she had witnessed her entire family being either killed or raped. And she was a mute for about 10 or 12 years. You're answerable to her. So it's not resentment, it's just frustration that what does it take for Muslims to be fair across the board that includes Kashmir? What is it? It's a genuine question. Do we need to bleach our skin maybe? Color our eyes? Speak a different way? Is it our aqidah? Is it our clothes? What is it? What is it about the Kashmiri Muslims that you cannot identify with?
Do you believe you're going to ever return to Kashmir in your lifetime?
I learned something from my father. And he said to me, when somebody asked him the same thing, and he gave an answer, but then he said to me in private, he said, if you feel that you are going to liberate, or I feel that I am going to liberate Kashmir in my lifetime, I must be the most arrogant fool that has ever existed. We hope for it, we work towards it, but we lay the foundations for the next generation. We don't want them to start from scratch again. I may hope for a liberated Kashmir in my lifetime, but I'm preparing that if it doesn't happen, at least the tools should exist, the work that has already been done, that you can stand on their shoulders and not have to start from scratch again. We are products of our elders. I can't speak on your behalf, but I'll definitely speak on my behalf. I'm a product of the people before me.
Yes.
I am only able to do what I can do, or speak the way that I can speak, or do the activism that I do, for not just for Kashmir, but anything, because of scholars and activists before us that have been here for the last 30, 40, 50 years. Again, without necessarily naming names, because it would be unfair if I miss anybody out. But they've been around. It's on their shoulders that we're standing today, which means that we need to allow the next generation to stand on our shoulders once we're gone as well.
So what does a liberated Kashmir look like? I mean, an independent state, or a state very similar to Azad Kashmir attached to Pakistan?
Doesn't matter, as long as it's not occupied. The people of Kashmir have come to a point where we say that anything is fine. Anything is fine, as long as we are no longer occupied, and as long as our Muslim identity is protected. Now, I keep on saying this because our masjids have become mandirs. They are now actively turning our masjids into mandirs, into Hindu temples. The daily morning prayer that used to be in Urdu or in Arabic is now being turned into the Hindu language. The history that we were taught is now into Hindu mythology. The identity of Kashmir is being replaced with Hinduism and the Hindutva. People are too scared to speak in the Kashmiri language. Just a couple of days ago, this is in the month of Ramadan, just a couple of days ago, 2 imams were kidnapped from the masjid, preventing the Taraweeh prayer. For what reason, nobody knows. And just a few weeks before Ramadan, a young man driving his truck, a daily wager, a laborer, was shot dead for no reason. There has been no accountability. So when you ask, what do we foresee? What do we want as an end solution? You wouldn't ask that for the Palestinians. Why would you ask that to a Kashmiri? It's just liberation of our land, liberation of our identity, to allow us to preserve our identity, to be able to pray 5 times a day, to read the Quran, and not have Sheikh Modi or Ustaz Ajit Doval give their version of Islam, which, by the way, they have tried. They are manufacturing their own form of Islam and trying to impose it upon us. So what do we want? We want to preserve our identity.
I started off with the quote from that's connected to Jahangir, the Mughal emperor, who said that if there was a place on earth, it would be here, it would be here, it would be here. What is it, if there was a heaven on earth, what is it about Kashmir that makes it such a delightful place?
The mountains, the trees, the air, the people, the language, the cuisine, the art, the history, the masjids, just everything. We were part of the Silk Route. We have a 5,000-year history. It's rich in heritage, in culture. I mean, a lot of it has of course been lost. A lot of it is being rebranded by India. But those of us that know or remember or have studied, the history of Kashmir goes as far back as the times of Alexander the Great, where some argue that even he visited Kashmir at one point, or his armies did at least. They claim that the lost tribe of Israel is in Kashmir. So there's so much history, for rightly or wrongly. The reason why it was considered to be paradise because of the weather, the welcoming nature of the people, which has also been our downfall because it's the same as the Palestinians. But it's everything, everything. Muhammad Jalal, you must visit Kashmir.
Sure.
And you will see for yourself. You know, they call it the Switzerland of Asia. I tell you, the Switzerland is Kashmir. It's the other way around. In fact, a long time ago, the United Nations, I think it was the United Nations, or maybe it was what was before the United Nations? The World League?
League of Nations.
The League of Nations.
Yeah.
Somebody said that if you want to look at the epitome of communal harmony, look at Kashmir. So it was one of the best places for everything. The temperature, the culture, the heritage, the history, the food. I keep on going about food because it's Ramadan, but genuinely, the food. If anybody's watching, just look up Wazwan. Look it up and let your mouth melt after iftar.
Alhamdulillah, inshallah, Dr. Muzammil will visit Kashmir together soon.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for your time, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair for having us and remembering the people of Kashmir.
Thank you so much. When the genocide in Gaza began, I vowed we would never let those responsible get away with this. Silence was complicity in a world that wants us to remain placid, a world that wants us to be concerned more about our immediate lives and interests. The system buys our souls in return for acquiescence with their empire-building project. We at the Thinking Muslim set about changing the narrative, and in the process, with Allah's barakah, we galvanize our communities to confront these political elites and send them a clear message. In elections on both sides of the Atlantic, we brought communities together and led the way in countering their pernicious agenda. Such is the power of this new media. Our mission is simple. We want to build an alternative Muslim media, one that is rooted in faith, thinking, and enlightened activism. And we need your help to expand this sacred undertaking. Our plan is to turn the Thinking Muslim into a multi-show, multi-country media project. Please help us by becoming a member. For as little as £10 a month, you will have access to bonus shows, behind-the-scenes content, and Q&A with me and my guests. But most importantly, your contributions will make this voluntary project go to the next level and give you a share, inshallah ta'ala, in this reward. Now, I know the demands on our sadaqah are great. Please do consider becoming a member of the Thinking Muslim, or send us your one-off donations by going to thinkingmuslim.com/membership. Jazakallah khair, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of us. Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.